What would you do if you walked into your own store and saw a cashier sobbing at the counter in a business you'd built to succeed? Richard Sullivan faced that question on a rainy Tuesday morning in March 2025, stepping into Sullivan's Home Goods as a stranger named Jim. He'd shuffled through the strip mall doors, a mid-performing outpost 2 hours from headquarters, expecting the steady hum of a retail chain he'd started 15 years ago with a single shelf and a handshake. Instead, he found Emily Carter, M to her co-workers, a frail 20-year-old, hunched over the checkout, tears streaking her pale cheeks as she scanned a customer's candles with trembling hands. The customer, a middle-aged woman in a raincoat, barely glanced at her. Tapping her foot like M was a glitch in the system. Rick's stomach twisted, 50 years of grit and pride buckling under the sight. He'd launched this chain, 12 stores now, to give folks a decent job, a place to thrive. Now, one of his own was breaking down in plain sight. The store wasn't a wreck, not outwardly. The aisles gleamed under fluorescent lights, shelves stocked with towels and kitchen gadgets, the air tinged with a faint lemon cleaner scent. But the vibe was off, way off. Employees moved slow, some restocking with half-hearted shoves, others fiddling with phones when no one watched. M forced a shaky, "Have a nice day," as the raincoat lady left, but her voice cracked, and she swiped at her eyes quick like she could hide it. Rick, salt and pepper beard glued on by a makeup pro, glasses perched on his nose, limped forward in a cheap polo and khakis, blending in as Jim, the new trainee. He'd built this company from nothing, stacking boxes, ringing up sales, charming customers until they came back. Now, with 12 locations, he spent his days in a glass office, sifting through reports, trusting his team to keep the spirit alive. But lately, the signs didn't add up. Mixed reviews complaining of rude staff, turnover spiking, profits dipping in spots like this. His corporate suits swore it was fine. Just a rough patch, Rick. 50 years had taught him to smell trouble through the polish. So he'd traded his sharp blazer for this disguise, ready to see the raw truth. Hiring was a snap. Too easy. Nancy Wheeler, the manager, a brisk 45-year-old with a tight bun and sharper eyes, barely skimmed his fake resume. "You're Jim? Here's your tag," she muttered, tossing it over. "Stay out of the way, don't mess up. No hello, no rundown, just a shove into the deep end." Rick pinned the tag on, shadowing the crew as the day kicked off. He hauled a box of mugs to aisle 6, watching Nancy bark orders. "Faster, Thomas!" at a skinny teenage stalker named Thomas Hayes, who hustled with a quiet focus. Some workers slacked, scrolling screens behind displays, but others, like M, moved like their lives depended on it. Then it hit, the moment that lit the fuse. Nancy stormed to the checkout, her voice slicing through the store's hum. "And what's the holdup? Get it together. You're slowing the line." M stammered, tears spilling fresh. "I'm sorry, sorry's not good enough." Nancy snapped, loud enough for a guy browsing lamps to turn. "Maybe if you worked instead of crying, you wouldn't be so useless." Rick's fists clenched in his pockets, 50 years of restraint straining against the urge to step in. M's shoulders slumped, her hands fumbling a barcode, and Rick saw it, pure despair, etched deep. He threw himself into the shift, restocking shelves, lugging boxes, keeping his eyes peeled. The crew was a mixed bag. Thomas darted between tasks, sweat beading on his forehead, while a couple older guys dawdled, chatting by the break room door. Customers grumbled, some fair, some just cranky, but the tension wasn't them, it was inside. Nancy prowled like a warden, snapping at Thomas when a display wobbled, ignoring a lady asking for help with curtains. Rick stayed near him, bussing a spilled coffee cup by her station, and caught her wiping her face again, hiding it from a customer who didn't care. By noon, he'd seen enough to know this wasn't a bad shift. It was a breaking point. Nancy's iron fist was crushing her team, and M was the canary in the coal mine. He couldn't blow his cover yet, not without more, but he wasn't walking away. Was Nancy just a bully, or was something darker choking this store? He'd built this place on hard work and heart, not tears and tyranny. Lunch rolled around, and Rick found M alone in the break room, head in her hands, a half-eaten apple abandoned on the table. He eased in, keeping it soft. "Hey, you okay?" She jolted, swiping at her eyes. "Oh, I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile that didn't stick. "You don't look fine," Rick said, sitting across from her, his limp a handy excuse to move slow. She hesitated, then sighed, her voice breaking. "It's just, Nancy's been on me for weeks. Nothing's good enough." And then, Rick pressed, gentle but firm. "Eens liepie tremblet. My mom's in the hospital, been sick for months. I've been picking up shift to pay the bills, but I'm so tired. Nancy doesn't care, thinks I'm lazy." Rick's chest tightened, 50 years of life flashing a memory of his own mother's hospital bed. Before he could answer, Nancy burst in. Lunch is over, move it." "And you," she glared at Rick, "don't get cozy, stock duty now." Rick nodded, masking the heat rising in his gut, and followed her out. This wasn't just a manager, this was a wrecking ball. He spent the afternoon hauling boxes, watching Nancy's reign unfold. She ignored a customer's question, berated Thomas for a crooked stack, and left him to fend for herself as the line grew. By shift's end, Rick's legs ached, but his mind burned. Morale was a ghost, customers felt the chill, and M was crumbling. He needed more, needed to know how deep this ran. What was Nancy doing to break her team? He'd built this chain to lift folks up, not grind them down. Now, he'd stay until he could fix it. "Hey, folks," he muttered under his breath, picturing the YouTube crowd. "If you want to see what I uncover next, hit that like button and subscribe. This is just the start." Richard Sullivan's second day as Jim started with a dull ache in his joints, 50 years catching up as he hauled a box of dishware into Sullivan's Home Goods. The store buzzed with a midweek crowd, suburban moms browsing candles, retirees eyeing throw pillows, but the air felt heavy, like a storm brewing under the fluorescent lights. Rick stacked mugs in aisle 6, keeping his salt and pepper beard and glasses in place, watching the crew stumble through the morning. Emily Carter, was back at the checkout, her hands steadier but her eyes still red-rimmed, scanning items with a quiet focus that didn't match her slumped shoulders. Thomas Hayes, Tom, a wiry 17-year-old, darted between shelves, restocking towels twice as fast as the others, sweat beading on his brow. The rest of the team was a mess. 2 older guys lingered by the stockroom, swapping stories, while a young cashier scrolled her phone behind a display. Rick fumbled a mug, nearly dropping it, and caught Nancy Wheeler's glare from across the floor. "Careful, Jim. Those break, it's on you," she barked, already turning to snap at someone else. 50 years of grit kept Rick's face blank, but inside he seethed. This wasn't a team. It was chaos, and Nancy was the whip cracking it apart. Trouble hit an hour in, right at the checkout. M was ringing up an elderly woman with a stack of curtains when the lady frowned, holding up a receipt. "This says no returns after 30 days. Can I get store credit instead?" M hesitated, her voice soft. "I think so, but let me check." Before she could finish, Nancy swooped in, her tone sharp as glass. "What's the holdup, M? You should know this." M flinched, her hands freezing mid-scan. "I just wanted to be sure." Nancy cut her off, loud enough for heads to turn. "You're wasting time. Useless as always. It's no credit after 30, period." The old lady shifted uneasy, muttering, "No need to yell," but Nancy ignored her, storming off. M's face flushed, her eyes glistening as she finished the sale, whispering, "Sorry, ma'am." Rick's stomach knotted, 50 years of restraint straining as he res-tacked a shelf nearby. Nancy wasn't just harsh, she was a bulldozer, flattening M in front of everyone. He saw it clear. She was the root, choking the life out of this store. The shift dragged on, and Rick kept close, hauling boxes, sweeping spills, picking up the slack where Nancy wouldn't. He watched Tom hustle, the kid lugging a crate of lamps twice his size. No complaint, just a tight jaw and quick steps. The slackers didn't budge. Phone girl giggled at a text. The old guys took a break that stretched 20 minutes. Nancy prowled, her voice a constant lash. "Tom, that's crooked. Fix it. Or Jim, quit dawdling." She never lifted a finger, didn't help a guy find a rug, didn't touch a broom, just pointed and yelled. Then Rick caught a snippet by the stockroom. Tom muttering to a co-worker as they unpacked vases. She docked me $10 last week. Dropped a plate by accident, Tom said, voice low. Complain, and she cuts your hours. Keeps us quiet. The co-worker nodded, grim. Same here, $5 for a late clock in, even though the system glitched. Rick's jaw tightened, 50 years of backbone stiffening. Fines for mistakes, threats for speaking up. This wasn't management. It was a cage, and Nancy held the key. Around 2, the crowd thinned, and Rick grabbed a broom, sweeping near M's station as she wiped down the counter. He kept it light, voice low. Rough day, huh? She shrugged, not looking up, her rag moving in tight circles. Same as always. He paused, then pushed gentle. Nancy's tough on you. Happen a lot? M's hand stilled, her voice barely a whisper. Every day. Nothing's good enough. Spill something, miss a sale, she's there, yelling. Rick's chest ached, the broom creaking under his grip. What do you keep going? M glanced away, shame creeping in. I don't have a choice. My mom's sick. Hospital bills keep piling up. I take every shift I can, but Nancy doesn't care, says I'm slow, lazy. Rick sat back, the cold tile biting his knees. 50 years, and he'd let his own store turn into this? He'd started Sullivan's to give folks a fair shot, not crush them under debt and insults. M's quiet fight, still showing up, still scanning, echoed the hustle he'd had at her age, building this chain from scratch. But now, his dream was a weight dragging her down. He worked through the afternoon, eyes sharp, cataloging every crack. The store was a pressure cooker, too few hands, too much work, every slip punished. Nancy berated Tom when a box tipped, ignored a lady asking for a discount, left him to handle a line alone. Customers griped, some fair, some just loud, but the crew took the heat, not the system. Rick overheard more, a cashier muttering about a cut paycheck, Tom joking he'd sell his skateboard to eat. This wasn't a workplace. It was a treadmill set to snap them. By late shift, Rick's arms burned from hauling, but his resolve was steel. He needed more. Needed to know how far Nancy's grip reached. How deep did this control go? He'd built this place on sweat and fairness, not fear and tears. Richard Sullivan's third day as Jim dawned gray and heavy. 50 years of instincts roaring that Sullivan's Home Goods was a house of cards ready to fall. He clocked in early, the store still quiet, grabbing a broom while Emily Carter brewed coffee and Thomas Hayes unpacked a shipment of rugs. The morning rush hit like a wave, customers haggling over blankets, kids tugging at displays, and Rick kept his disguise tight, salt and pepper beard itching as he stocked shelves, watching Nancy Wheeler's shadow stretch over every move. He'd seen the cracks, understaffing, petty fines, a crew on the brink, but the Real bomb dropped around noon when he slipped in the back to grab tape and found Nancy's office door ajar. On her desk, a spreadsheet glowed. Payroll slashed with performance fees. M's check gutted by $30, Tom's short 15, numbers twisted to paint a profit mirage for headquarters. Rick's heart pounded as he scrolled. Customer complaints buried, emails from staff begging for help ignored, all signed off by Nancy. 50 years of trust shattered. She wasn't just breaking her team. She was burying their cries, fattening her stats while they crumbled. The truth gnawed at him through the afternoon, guilt and rage churning in his gut. He hauled a crate of vases with Tom, the kid's skinny arms trembling under the load, and rang up a lamp beside him, her quiet thank you barely audible. Rick had built this chain 15 years back, stacking shelves, ringing bells, promising a place where folks could grow. Now, he sat in a cushy office, nodding at rosy reports, while Nancy turned his vision into a vice. How many pleas had he missed? How many workers had he let down? He replayed every scene. M's tears, Tom's hustle, the crew's silence, and saw his own failure stark. He traded boots for loafers, let oversight slip, and now his people were paying with their sweat and souls. Around 3, he caught Tom by the stockroom, res-tacking a wobbly pile. You ever think about walking out? Rick asked, voice low. Tom shook his head, wiping his brow. Can't, need the cash. Nancy's got us pinned. Quit, and she'll blackball us anywhere else. Rick's throat closed, shame washing over him. Could he burn this mess down before it broke them for good? The storm peaked at 5 when Nancy turned the screws tight. Rick was straightening a display near the counter when he heard it. Nancy's voice slicing through the store, aimed at him. "You're late clocking that sale, Carter," she hissed, pointing at a stack of coasters M had just rung up. "Ask for a day off again, and you're out? No hours, no nothing." M shrank back, her face white as ash. I just need one day for my mom." "Excuses," Nancy barked, loud enough for a guy in aisle 3 to turn. "Can't hack it. Find another job." Rick's blood boiled, 50 years of restraint snapping as he gripped a shelf hard enough to dent the wood. He edged closer, pretending to adjust a lamp, and caught Nancy step to the phone, dialing Edward Marshall, the regional manager. "Yeah, Ed," she muttered, voice smug. "I keep him drained, keeps him too tired to fight. No trouble that way." Rick's fist shook, rage and disbelief colliding. The twist hit like a sledgehammer. Nancy wasn't just sloppy. She was starving them deliberately, a cold plan to crush their spirit and keep her throne. By nightfall, Rick was a wreck, watching him stumble through the last hour like a wraith. She was fading, eyes glassy, steps shaky, scanning a stack of napkins with hands that quivered like leaves. Rick stayed near, catching a box when it slipped from her grip, and saw the brutal reality. She was past breaking, running on fumes in a body that couldn't hold. Around 8, as the store quieted, it cracked. Em was at the counter, ringing up a latecomer's candles, when her legs gave out. She swayed, grabbing the edge, then crumpled, the scanner clattering to the floor as she hit the tile with a soft thud. Rick dropped his broom, rushing over, kneeling beside her. "Ink, you walkie." She blinked slow, trying to sit, but her arms buckled, dark circles stark against her pallor. "Just dizzy," she mumbled, voice slurring faint. Rick steadied her, feeling the frail jut of her shoulders, too thin, too fragile. "You're not dizzy, you're starving," he said, voice cracking with fury and grief. She didn't argue, just slumped against the counter, breath shallow, too spent to rise. Rick's heart sank, a black tide swallowing him. This was his store, his legacy, and it was crushing her, one relentless shift at a time. He had the proof, Nancy's lies, the team's despair. But could he act fast enough to pull him back from the edge? Or was he too late to save them from Nancy's chokehold? Richard Sullivan stood in Nancy Wheeler's cluttered office, the air thick with tension and the stale whiff of old coffee. 3 days undercover as Jim had ripped the veil off Sullivan's home goods, exposing a pit of cruelty with Nancy at its core. Rick had stayed late the night before, digging through files with his CEO login. Payroll records slashed with fake fines. Ignored complaints from Emily Carter and Thomas Hayes piling up. Reports to headquarters twisted to hide the mess. M's file hit hardest. Hours docked for errors. Pleas for a day off dismissed. Her pay whittled to nothing while her mother's hospital bills soared. Rick's hands trembled as he shut the laptop. 50 years of pride crumbling. He'd let this tyrant turn his store into a grinder, crushing his people under his own name. Guilt burned, but it lit a fire too. This wasn't just about firing Nancy. It was about rebuilding what he'd lost. It stopped today. He waited till the morning hum peaked, the store buzzing with customers browsing rugs and lamps. Then he strode to the office where Nancy sat, barking at Tom over a crooked display. Rick knocked once hard and stepped in. Nancy didn't look up. "What now, Jim?" He shut the door, locked it with a click, and yanked off his glasses, peeling the fake beard free, gray hair spilling loose. "We need to talk." Nancy's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Who the hell?" Rick's voice came out steady, cold as steel. "I'm Richard Sullivan." Her jaw dropped, color draining from her pinched face. He pulled out his phone, opened the company's site, and shoved it at her. His photo, sharp and unmistakable, stared back. "I own this chain," he said, stepping closer, "and I've watched you break my people for 3 days." Nancy stiffened, voice sharp. "This a stunt." Rick's tone turned lethal. "You've docked pay, ignore their cries, run this place like a prison. It's over. Keys now." Nancy's lips thinned, but she tossed the ring on the desk, hands shaking. "You're fired," Rick said. "Leave, security's coming." Nancy's face twisted, but she grabbed her purse and bolted, heels clicking fast. Rick exhaled, the weight lifting a fraction. He didn't pause. Minutes later, he stood by the checkout, facing a cluster of wary faces. And behind the counter, Tom by the shelves, a handful of others mid-task, frozen like they'd seen a ghost. "Listen up," Rick said, voice firm but warm, cutting through the whispers. "I'm Richard Sullivan, the guy who started this place. I went undercover because I knew something was off. Well, I found worse than I dreamed." The room went still, eyes wide. "Nancy's gone right now." A stunned silence. Then Tom's shoulders eased. "Those paycheck cuts? Done. If you've lost money, and I know you have, you're getting it back, full back pay." Murmurs erupted. Relief, disbelief, hope flickering. Rick locked eyes with Em, her hands clutching a scanner. "And you, no more struggling. Take time for your mom. Paid leave, starting today. We'll cover her bills for 3 months." He handed her a company card, her fingers trembling as she took it. "One more thing," he added, voice rising. "We're fixing this store. More staff, fair hours, real support. And every exec in this company's working a week here yearly, starting with me." Tom grinned, a spark lighting his tired face. Next day, the store felt different, lighter, like a fog had burned off. Rick tapped Tom to step up, his hustle too good to waste. "You've kept this place running," Rick told him. "Help me lead it right. Assistant manager, effective now." Tom blinked, stunned. "Me? Yeah, I'm in." Em stayed too, and when Rick asked what she needed, her voice came firm. "Time to breathe, and a chance to grow." "You got it," Rick said. Over the week, he dug in, stocking shelves, ringing sales, hiring 2 new hands to ease the load. He revamped training, Tom drafting a guide so no one floundered. Pay bumped up, schedules set fair, no more chaos shifts. Customers lingered, the air filling with chatter and the clink of carts, not dread. Em stopped shaking, her steps surer each day. It wasn't all easy. A week later, Rick faced a boardroom of pinched suits at headquarters. Edward Marshall, the regional manager, shifted uneasy. "Some stores are resisting. Rick, managers say extra staff cuts profits." Rick leaned in, voice like iron. "Profits hit a bully. I trusted your numbers, Ed, and they masked this. No more." The exec squirmed, but younger one spoke up. "I'm in. We need to see the floor." The rest nodded, grudgingly on board. Back at the store, change stuck. Tom knocked on Rick's door one night, steady. "I want to train the newbies. Keep it solid." Rick smiled. "You're on, kid." 2 weeks later, Rick watched Em scan a sale, her hands calm, Tom guiding a rookie with a grin. The tears were gone, replaced by purpose. He'd saved more than a store. He'd saved a piece of himself, lost in those corporate years. But as he scanned the humming aisles, a question lingered. Could one man keep this chain from cracking again? "Hey, folks," he said to an imaginary camera, "thanks for riding this out with me. If you like Rick's fight, subscribe, hit that like, and drop a comment. More stories coming your way."